everyone. Welcome to this, our last Lunch and Learn of the fall 2012 semester here at the University of Kentucky SLIS. My name is Heather Burke and I'm a GA here. And I'm really just fortunate and very happy to introduce our panel of speakers today who are going to be speaking to us on the topic of archival professions. And as the topic was archives, this panel was actually nominated and put together by our UK student chapter of the Society of American Archivists. So without further ado, I would love to turn it over to our speakers and let them give a maybe brief introduction about who they are and their title and where they work. So we'll start with Becky Ryder.
Thank you. I'm the director of the library at Keeneland, and I've been there for 3 years as director. And prior to that, I had about 20 years experience working as head of preservation services here at the university. And before coming to the university, I had preservation roles, positions at Virginia Tech and at Virginia. So I've been in an academic environment for a great deal of my life, and I find it a great, wonderful paradigm shift to be working in a different environment. Not that the former was bad, but just that it's different, and change is good.
Me too. I'm working in a very different environment as well. My name is Ginny Daley, and I work here at UK. I work in the facilities library. So facilities manages all the buildings, the dorms, the grounds, the landscaping, and I'm their librarian and archivist. So I'm basically the keeper of the blueprints for the university, as well as all the property records, deeds, and leases, and related information stuff. It is a different, I'm approaching 30 years of being an archivist. I graduated from UK Library School in 1985, and I've had more traditional career path, working started out working at KDLA, worked at Duke University in their special collections for about 10 years, and then a number of smaller institutions. And this is really kind of a freaky little archive. It's not part of the university library system here. My main clientele, it's a somewhat restricted collection, and my main clientele are the people who work on the buildings, who need to know when a valve is shot, where it is, and how to get to it. It's not the general public that uses my library. So it's an interesting challenge for me because I'm very interested in building history, so it's a good blend for me.
I'm Heather Fox. I'm Associate Curator of Special Collections at the Filson Historical Society, which is in Louisville, Kentucky. I was a student here at UK and I graduated in 2009, and this is actually my first permanent professional job that I just started August 1st. And so in the interim, I've done a lot of contract work for a variety of institutions in Kentucky, including Apple Shop, the Speed Art Museum, University of Louisville, Kentucky Historical Society. I've patched together stuff, and now I'm stable for a good long while, and it feels good. So what my job is, I'm in charge of the prints and photographs collection at the Filson, and not only do I process the photo collections, but I also handle photo orders for people who want to purchase images for publications, or we just had somebody buy one that they're going to put up on the side of a building, School of Art in Marion, Indiana. So I deal with that kind of thing as well.
I'm Beth Shields. I'm at the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives, and that's the Kentucky State Archives. I work on electronic records management for state and local agencies. So we talk about the records management, but also transferring records for long-term preservation to the state archives, things like email management, file management. And I graduated from the library school here in 2004. And after leaving library school, I had a brief stint at the Library of Virginia, that's their state archives, and then came back and spent 5 years at the Kentucky Historical Society. So research archivist in their library, and then a few years as the oral history library, or archivist there. And then kind of came back to KDLA where I'd interned. So I'm going to be talking more from a government perspective.
My name is Sarah Jane Poindexter, and I'm Associate Curator of Special Collections at the Filson Historical Society, as well as Heather, in Louisville, Kentucky. I've been in this position for 5 years. I came to Louisville from Boston, where I got my MLS at Simmons College. And in this position, I get to wear many hats, which is very fun. We're a private nonprofit, and our mission is to collect, preserve, and tell the significant stories of Kentucky and the Ohio River Valley. So we have a regional focus, and in my role as an associate curator, I do reference work, I catalog collections, I do preservation work, I do outreach, use a lot of social media tools to kind of engage and connect patrons to collections, a whole variety of things. And being a small institution, we get to kind of work interdepartmentally on promoting our mission, essentially. I'll leave it at that. Oh, and I'm currently chair of the Kentucky Council on Archives, the state professional organization for archivists in Kentucky.
Thank you. I'm Valerie Edgeworth, and I'm also at the Kentucky State Archives in Frankfort. I also graduated from the UK Library School program in 2004, along with Beth. Beth and I joke that we've been on our 10-year mission professionally together. We interned together, we've worked together at both the Historical Society and at Libraries and Archives. I've been in my current position at Libraries and Archives since 2005. I run a program called the Kentucky Guide Program. And over the last 30 years, we have cataloged primary source materials at archival repositories across the state. Now, in 1976, great project. In 2012, we don't really need to be doing that for other institutions at this point. So the guide has kind of transitioned into more of an advocacy and outreach partner with institutions in the state. We're very involved with the State Historical Records Advisory Board for the state, which we can talk more about that, and funding sources for grants. We also are responsible for Kentucky Archives Month, the annual celebration every October. That is also run through my office. We also have an internship program in archives that we typically have 1 or 2 interns, and several have been from this program. We currently have 1 from this program and 1 from Eastern Kentucky University. So, and we will be having an opening for next year. So, anybody wants to talk internships, and it is paid. So, you do have to come to Frankfurt, but it is definitely worth the drive. So, several of us have been involved with the internship in one way or another. So, and then I had a question, Heather. Can we kind of see who's here and out inland with us? It'd be nice to know who we have and
I would love to. That
what
would
their
be
interests
that's a
are.
great idea.
Okay.
So I know we have a lot of faculty and staff from campus who are here, as well as some new students and old faces. I'd just like to go around. We have Joe Miller, teaches information technology here. We have Ruth Bryan, who is the current director of archives for University of Kentucky.
I'm Pam Edwards. I'm a full-time employee at the university, but I'm also studying archives. And I have 1 class left, so I graduate in the spring. And I would love to do an internship, but when you work full-time, the hours do not work.
Absolutely.
So I'm hoping to get an archival position. I just don't know how I have the experience behind it to actually get hired.
My name is Meg Moran. I'm just one of the students in engineering. I'm in my 2nd year. My interest is actually more in government libraries, so it's interesting for the government archive side of it, because a lot of the government jobs that are popping right now are actually archives jobs with the Navy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Me?
Yes.
Oh, I get used to being kind of in the background here whenever I'm doing the tech stuff. No, I'm Daniel Noss. I'm one of the technicians downstairs. I guess my background is almost entirely in academic libraries these days, with a little bit of basic IT stuff, and I guess that's kind of the direction I'm going.
I'm Desiree Perry. I'm a 2nd year library school student, and I'm focusing on academic libraries as well.
I'm Deirdre Skaggs. I'm the Associate Dean for Special Collections here at UK Libraries.
I'm Sarah Dorkinghouse. I'm the Digital Project Library Manager at the University of Kentucky Digital Library Services.
I'm Ida, and I work with DLS and the archives and manuscripts, and I'm in my final semester.
She's our current president of the UK student chapter of SAA as well.
Yeah. Well, and I'm handing it over to Heather, I think, today. So.
I'm Casey Cal. This is my first week here in library school.
school, and I work over in the archive as well.
Wade Bishop, assistant professor.
Dennis Kerrigan, a part-time instructor in UK SLIS.
Chris Walls. I'm finishing up my first year here in archival and governmental library reserves. That's what they're asking me.
I'm Susan McDonald. I'm the Student Affairs Officer at SLIS.
Rebecca Hamburgess. I'm an MLIS student and I'm focusing on health and science.
And I'm Jeff Huber. I'm the director of the school.
Thank you.
And one of our online guests wanted me to introduce her. Edna Fugit is joining us from the University of Pikeville. She's a reference librarian, an archivist, and a second-yearish student.
I spoke to her on the phone a couple weeks ago, actually.
Thank you for being here, Edna.
And it's also being recorded, so more people will be watching it later. I don't know if that was, so there'll be lots of people in the interview.
Yes, and this will be up on our Vimeo site for SLIS in the week following. And since it is being recorded, I just want to let you know, sometimes people who are further down, Becky and Jenny and Heather, probably speak a little bit louder so that we can make sure we record everything. So now that we've gone and done our introductions, I have a starter question as kind of a two-parter, and I think we'll get discussion going and for each of you, which is, how did you get started in archives, and what has changed since then? How did you get started in archives, and what has changed since then in your experience?
I can jump right into that.
All right.
I will have to be honest, I backed into archives because I had a bachelor's degree in English and no job prospects. But I loved old things, and it was like, go to library school and be in special collections or be a flea market dealer. You know, and I was kind of between those two, but I just love to fondle old stuff. So I decided I could always be a flea market person later. And I wanted to work for the greater good, so I started the degree and launched my career there. And it really speaks to what is different today. There really aren't any jobs, or at least many jobs out there, where you can fondle old things. I am now a data wrangler. Everything I do is digital, and it's managing files. And for as much as I love the blueprints that I work with, I don't get to roll them out and look at them. I'm managing PDF and CAD versions of them. So it's really, and I don't even like computers, but you have a lesson here. You gotta be flexible and go with the flow if you wanna keep the paycheck coming, so.
I would say that my very first professional job was as a reference librarian during the bicentennial years, and I was working at the University of Virginia. So every day we would have a request to get some information from the Jefferson papers. So I would just march down to the archives of the manuscripts and look at the materials. I saw no difference at all between published material and unpublished material. To a user, that has not changed. To the end user in the world, information is information, and the distinctions that we apply to them as being published or unpublished are pretty artificial in some ways. So I dove right into that material right away, and when I began to have a specialty in preservation, it of course encompassed all types of preservation formats, so all types of formats. So even though I haven't had a title per se as an archivist, I have been working with those types of materials pretty much all my career. So that's how, a different spin. Didn't get the degree in archives.
I can say that rather than backing into it, I actually sort of stumbled on the profession. I was in my first semester here at UK, and I was actually walking down that hallway over there, headed towards the bathroom between breaks or something, and there was a flyer on the wall, and it said, "Do you like old newspapers? Well, call me." And I was like, "I like old newspapers." That's pretty cool. And so I called him up, and I ended up calling Copana Terry, who has headed up the National Digital Newspaper Program for, I guess, the last 4 years or so. And so I called her up, and I said, "Yeah, I like old newspapers. You know." And at the time, I hadn't decided I wanted to be an archivist. I was just in library school and trying to figure out what path I wanted to take. And I was kind of looking for my people. I kept telling my husband that, "Where are my people? I can't find them." And when I called Copana, she said, "You know, I put that flyer up a year ago. We're not even doing like hiring for that job anymore. But actually, somebody just left, and I have, you know, some money to pay somebody. So if you want to work for I don't know, 4 or 6 hours a week when you're here. I commuted from Louisville. You know, so that's how I started. And once I started getting in there with the old newspapers, and I was just blocking scans, you know, and listening to my iPod. And she, as I talked to her about, you know, the profession, she encouraged me to take Bill Marshall's Intro to Archives class. And when I took that class, I've told this story, but I'll tell it again. The first day of class, Bill Marshall said, you know, every day I go to work, I look forward to it, and I want to help all of you have that experience. And that was the beginning of it for me. And he helped me get my first internship, which was at the Filson, where I met Sarah Jane, who was my sort of first archival mentor, and then it just blossomed from there. And it's so, and the difference, I mean, I kind of came in towards more of a, on the cusp of the digital thing. I mean, it had already started, so I don't know if there are a lot of differences. Yeah. Probably the social media sort of aspect of outreach really came into the fore in my experience, so that's what's changed.
I've got a totally different transition. I grew up in a family where vacations were surrounded by family history. So we actually spent a lot of time in a lot of areas researching various things about family, so that landed me in courthouses and historical societies at a very young age with nothing to do. Now when I was deciding what I wanted to be when I grew up, my background is in history and government, and I really thought I was going to be an attorney. That was the route that I was planning to go. And my father-in-law is an attorney, and that kind of changed my mind really quick about it. I just decided that was not the field for me. But I knew with a history degree I did not want to be a teacher at that point. And so I came to the library school in 2002, got offered the internship at the State Archives, and it's like my worlds collided. I had everything that I had known and understood about courthouses from my childhood come into public records, and it's like there's people who actually get paid to do this, not just volunteers at a local historical society. So it kind of snowballed into that. But what actually made the difference for me was UK was participating, and I think Beth will say the same thing, the Southeastern Archives Education Collaborative at that point. And we had the opportunity to take several archival courses. When I was here, we were very on the edge of digital. We only had one online class the entire time I was here at UK, but I got to take classes at LSU, South Carolina, Auburn, and got to take courses that were very specific to the archival profession and kind of guided my work. All my work has been government, and most of it in public records. But it's still a lot of fun. Most people think it's just family history, but there's a lot more to it than that. So kind of a totally different story. So.
Well, I kind of got into it in a similar way to Jenny, where I was very intrigued by old stuff and kind of actually having a hands-on kind of exploration and working with old materials. And I was very interested in culture as well. And as an undergraduate, I studied anthropology, and upon graduation worked for a few years as a professional archaeologist. And while doing archaeology, that's when I discovered archives. I never even knew what archives were. I had to go into archives and do background research before I could go into the field. And then everything that we found would go into an archive. And I started to think, well, this archiving thing is kind of cool, and it seems like a lot more stable than archaeology. And there must be tons of jobs in this field, because there's no jobs in archaeology. And so I eventually found my way into a library science program, and I always knew I wanted to go in the archives path. What I didn't know was how digital it was, how much technology was going to play a part in that career path. And I'm kind of glad I didn't know that, because I think it might have intimidated me from going in this direction. And now that I'm here, it's just like a good, healthy challenge. And kind of like what Bill Marshall says, it's every day is so fun, and it's different. It's always changing, and you have to keep up, and you have to problem solve. And but I think that's what makes it so fascinating to all of us. And meanwhile, you're working with culture, and you're working with people's lives and their stories and their legacy and institutions and your community, and it's deeply meaningful. And as much as most people don't kind of get it, I don't want to say most people don't get it, but you have to.
They do, but they don't.
Right, and you kind of always have to be persuasive, and to the point where you're explaining the value of archives and of the service of your work. And I think that's a really important part of being an archivist too, being able to talk about it and for people to understand that. The second part of the question was, how have I seen things change? I've only been in the field professionally for 5 years, but in that 5 years I've seen dramatic changes in, obviously, the economy and the way that the economy has affected the job market. There aren't a plethora of archival jobs to begin with, but since the downturn in the economy, I've noticed a lot of the grant monies that would go into funding positions in archives have been decreasing, and as people leave positions, instead of filling them, sometimes that position is just eliminated and the responsibilities are absorbed in other ways in an institution. So people are scrambling a little bit more than I think that they were when I very first entered the field. But I don't know, I think it's always been a very adaptable field and will continue to be so, and who knows what's down the road. It's kind of the new normal. I don't think it's going to go back.
Well, I started out with an undergraduate degree in secondary education in social studies. So for some crazy reason, I thought I wanted to be a history teacher. That would not have worked. I'm married to a high school teacher, and I don't know what I was thinking, but I always had a love of history. And I also always worked on campus and libraries. I worked at the campus library, the MAPS library here. So it became very clear by junior year of college that I wanted to go to library school. I didn't know what type of institution I wanted to work in. I was very open, public library, academic library, and then like Valerie was offered an internship at the Kentucky State Archives, and that really just changed everything. I continued to still work here on campus, but we stayed 2 years there, and that was kind of it. My path was clear to me, and like that, like I say, the end of the story, you know. And so I've had the opportunity to work in different places, and the change that I see is, I agree with what everybody else, change in economy, change in social media and digital, but what I see is a change in me when I went to work in archives. I wanted to work with old stuff. I liked processing. I liked touching things. So that's kind of where I saw myself leaving library school, and I did a lot of reference work, and that was kind of my goal in mind. And then that's not really what happened. So my last semester here, there was a class in oral history. I said, I'm not going to take that. I'm never going to work in oral history. 3 years later, I'm an oral history archivist. And you know, and then I never thought I would work in electronic records or records management. I really didn't have a background there. And then a few years later, that's what I'm working in. So really for me, the changes in my thinking as an archivist, I'm not necessarily going to work with old things. I'm not always going to work in reference. It's going to lead me places that I never suspected that I would work based on interest or aptitude or what have you. But I did, and it is, like Sarah Jane said, you know, there's so many things that are a part of it that you do that you don't expect. The, you know, reference and you know, data wrangling, and that's what makes it great. It's not great to work with diminishing budgets, but I think it kind of pulls you together as a profession, as a professional, and shows you what you can do, what your institution can do. How do you continue to provide services and be dedicated to your profession when things, you know, your budgets are shrinking? And your services, you know, the expectation of services is growing. Yeah. You know, the more we do digital, the more people want it. And, you know, I think we all will attest to the fact that people come in and say, well, you know, or call and say, I thought everything was online. Aren't you digitizing everything?
And against that referendum that pay for our salaries.
Right.
That's what
that
right.
We close that
when they're young.
Well, thank you, Beth. I think that's a great way to open the discussion, and I'm going to turn to our audience here and online. And does anyone have a question for our panel?
I'm curious about what resources you would recommend, especially for somebody coming into the field, and like just what to be involved with. Like, I know KCA is a good one here in Kentucky, but what else should we be looking out for?
Well, take advantage of your professional organizations at the student registration level. That's one thing. You can join SAA or ALA, and you can also do some tricks by signing up to attend the trade shows and not necessarily the conferences, which will give you an opportunity to network with colleagues as well as vendors and to see products and to see what's out there in terms of new services. You'll see vendors, you'll see, you know, people that can digitize content, that offer equipment, that offer metadata services or cataloging services. They still actually even do retrospective conversion for catalogs. We just went through one. So that's an opportunity. And the other thing I like to suggest is take advantage of workshops and see if you can coax your institution to hold workshops. If you host a workshop, you almost always get at least one free registration. And if you're hosting it here at the University of Kentucky, perhaps there's a way to collaborate with the library school to get a discounted rate for student attendance. But Lyrasis is willing to do workshops anywhere, you know, drop of a hat. They've done many here. So is even NEDCC from Andover, and even Amigos. Our Amigos, Gina Meeks, is based in Louisville. She works out of a Midwest shop, but she's based in Louisville and is doing the outreach to Kentucky as well. So take advantage of those. These are all NEH funded programs. This is your tax dollars at work. These are long respected programs. They have great teachers, great adjuncts, and they cover a variety of services, and they've been extremely responsive to user need, as well as offering the traditional book repair workshop. They have e-records, they have, you know, PDFA workshops, you know, at the gamut that you need to know.
I would also like to add that the SHRAB, as you know, the State Historical Records Advisory Board. Okay. You know, I don't know if you know this, but the SHRAB funds, they pay for workshops for people who work in Kentucky. So if you bring, you know, if you host one, then they will often pay for the entire registration for, you know, 30 people. But the other aspect of that is Becky's talking about the variety of workshops that are available, and they're also always looking for suggestions of ones that people want to attend. So you just email Mark Myers, who's the head of that, and I mean, I do that all the time. Hey, can we do this? Hey, can we do this? And I don't know how many suggestions, how often does he get suggestions?
Only when solicited. Very rarely do people just email him. Now, if a new course offering comes up and it's like, oh, you know, need it now, that might happen, but usually it's reminders at meetings or things that go out on Listservs. So never hesitate to ask.
Yeah, I really
because more than
encourage
likely
that.
the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Because the way that our SHRAB strategic plan is written, a lot of our funding through the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, NHPRC, for our SHRAB, is for training.
Right.
So do not hesitate. If you don't remember Mark, remember Beth or I, and we'll get it to him, but he is at KDLA with us.
Same here.
So, and Becky's on SHRAB too, yes.
I'm on
and
SHRAB
Heather is
too.
too.
Yeah.
So.
And so am I.
And that's right.
You guys have to meet.
So see, we have a lot of people, but yes, and again, most of the time, if you're working in Kentucky, they will pay the entire thing. If you're just a member of a institutional membership and not a personal member, you might have to pay $25. So.
Well, and I think we've gone through most of the SAA ones now, so it's a good time to maybe branch out into, you know, talk to Gina, and we can connect you with her too.
And you can never have the more product, less process workshop too often, because you have a, you know, we had one last fall or last spring, whenever that was.
This fall.
Oh, God. There was a...
Oh, no, it was last fall, but it was full. Yeah, it was full.
But it was, and there was free parking at Keeneland, so that's even another benefit.
And again, like I said, if you're willing to host, that always helps too.
I also feel that professional listservs are a good way to just kind of stay current and see what people are talking about and stay up to date on who's doing what at their institution or who has a question about something. And if you're not already on the SAA listserv, which isn't called that, I don't know what it's
Archives and Archivists.
Archives and Archivists listserv, I would highly recommend that one. And then there are all these kind of subgroups off of that if you have an area of specialization that you're interested in. Those are great, and you can ignore half of the messages, you can read some of the other ones.
One of the best ones is the Lone Arrangers Roundtable.
Yes.
That is a very vibrant listserv, and they ask a very wide variety of questions from, you know, where can I get microfilm digitized, to what would you put in your disaster closet, to, you know, just about, because they are the only person, so they're doing it all. And so you get a very wide, and you get very good response, very sensible responses.
Also, if you're interested, or you think you might be interested in a specific area of the archival world, and you can volunteer, ask. Just start asking around. We all have backlogs. We all have extra projects. And even if it's just something you want to spend the day with something, or you want to spend 20 hours in a semester doing something, I think it's safe to say we'd all work with you because we've all been there, done that.
I'd love to have some
if,
interns in the
if there is
spring.
something,
I'd love to.
yeah, if there's something that we all need help, and we'd love to help train you. So never hesitate to ask for that either. So
I would just like to add in terms of resources, find someone who's in the profession that can kind of help you out. And I think from your perspective, it might feel like you're, I don't know, taking advantage of us or bugging us or something like that. Not the case. But I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for certain people along the way encouraging me and saying, oh, don't worry about this, focus on this instead. And just giving those gentle, can give you perspective that you don't have when you're trying to enter the profession. And the more, depending on where you want to be, in academic libraries, government, whatever, that may not be where you end up in this economy. So it's good to have people hang on to them, latch on to them in different parts of the profession too. I'm not doing what I thought I was going to do. I always wanted to be a photo archivist, and never in my career did I have the opportunity. Those doors were always closed and other ones opened. But I will say that I have had some of the coolest jobs, and it's because people know who I am and what I'm like, and have forwarded me a job description and said, I saw this and I thought of you, and I wasn't even looking for another job, and lo and behold, it's like a miracle, and I got, segued into it. So I think using people in the profession as a resource is pretty invaluable, and it's not a real tangible thing, but it can help.
Has anybody used the SAA mentor program before in here? I was just saying, I know there are some negative experiences. I actually had a positive one, because I always like to share it because it seems to be very rare and far between. But Kathy Johnson at U of L was actually my mentor. And I truly, truly lucked out. But you don't have to use that formal source of SAA. I think several of us are willing to be mentors along the way. And to this day, Kathy and I she still kind of checks on me 10 years later, which is really, really, really nice to have. So never hesitate to ask for a mentor, because a lot of us are willing to do that. Because again, we wouldn't be where we are without those before us. So.
And as you mentioned, KCA, the Kentucky Council on Archives, but Kentucky's also a member of MAC, the Midwest Archives Conference. And you can apply for scholarships with them if you're a first-time attendee. So if it's difficult to get travel funds, you could look at something like that. They do student posters and papers, and SAA, I know SAA does, and that'll get you kind of outside of Kentucky and networking for when you're looking down the road for a job, or if you don't want to stay in Kentucky to meet folks. And it is a tight-knit community here in Kentucky, and that's not a bad thing. Like they said, we're all kind of interconnected and in contact, and see each other through KCA, and it's a very welcoming bunch.
That's a very, very generous archival community, very generous.
Becky, did you mention volunteering to work registration desks at conferences? Because
Not
I did
specifically,
that.
but that's a good idea.
I've done that
Excellent
when I
idea.
was a student and just scrapping around at freelance jobs and stuff. I volunteered at 3 different conferences, one in Philadelphia, and they paid for my registration, and I just roomed with somebody I knew. The Oral History Association was in Louisville. I volunteered for that one, and then I can't remember the other one off the top of my head now. But anyway, the MAC one, yeah. And the MAC one, that's how I met everybody that I know in archives pretty much. So anyway, I encourage, just email people and say, do you need volunteers? And then ask them. I tried that at SAA, and they don't let you pay for your registration doing that when you volunteer for it. See, they won't do it. Yeah, but other ones will. So, and then you get to meet everybody who works at the conference. The people who are hosting and all that.
We actually asked for volunteers, for those of you who were here last year for the Best Practices Exchange. Didn't have any takers, and that was right here, 3 blocks away. The reason I bring that up is don't be afraid to come and just volunteer. You don't have to, the whole point is to learn. You don't have to already know something to participate as a student in a conference. And that was something that was a little frustrating to me as a former intern. I mean, it was 3 blocks away. So when that opportunity, I'm glad Heather brought up some good experiences with that, because we were really bummed to not have, I know Katie at the time did send that information out several times, and that would, like I said, it was at the Hyatt. So definitely try and take advantage of that if it comes back this close. So
I would also say, go ahead and get a business card made, and it won't really be like a business card. It'll just be, have your contact information on it. And I have had students come at conferences, you know, and pass out their card and say they're looking for a job. And it's kind of geeky, but nobody's going to know if you don't do that. And there's ways that you can do it that are not so, you know, aggressive or anything like that. But it's, I don't know, do you all have cards made already? I thought that might be a generational thing, and everybody has them now just because they pass them out. Or, and go ahead and get on LinkedIn. I don't do LinkedIn, but everybody's always like telling me to get on there. But so that's probably a good networking thing. Have that all ready. In this economy, in this job market, you can't afford to, you know, not have somebody not remember a great conversation you had at a conference. You know, make sure that they know how to get back in touch with you. So.
Any other questions?
Do you have any other job seeking advice? Besides, just because I look at like Archives Gig every day and I'm on a couple listservs, but I just, the whole process is very intimidating. And I would imagine other people watching this today feels that way. So just any tidbit advice.
in 2004, well actually in 2002 when I started the school, I was told that if I could move anywhere, it would be a lot likelier of a chance of finding a job. And that was something that, at that point, I was open to that. Well, come April of 2004, I'm preparing for comps, and my husband accepted a job in Lexington. So that kind of took every opportunity that I was looking at completely out the window. So I started networking again. I started back at my internship. The grant money lasted till September, so it was like, okay, I don't have to worry about this till after I graduate. I at least have until the end of the federal fiscal year. I started networking and attending meetings, grant jobs. That's where I think a lot of grant and interim work can come in handy. I don't think there is one real big solution to it, but if you can move, it's a lot more, more flexibility. So
I was told the same exact thing. If you're geographically flexible, then you have a much higher chance of getting a job. So. And sometimes it's better to just, I know it doesn't seem like a desirable thing, but to go someplace for a couple of years, get some experience, that'll open doors elsewhere, someplace where you're more interested in living. And I think this is a theme that keeps coming up so much between everything we're saying is just do not be afraid to ask people for help or advice at any point in the way. I really feel very strongly about the squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of scenario in life, and particularly in this career path. And it's a very open and inclusive and friendly professional group here in Kentucky, and I've also really observed that nationally as well. And while there may not be a lot of jobs, and the competition for those jobs is competitive, it's not like a nasty experience. People are really willing to look over your resume for you, or if you just send them an email and check in with them and let them know you're on the job market and types of things you'd be interested in.
Never hesitate to contact the institution directly either that you may be interested in working for. Again, with KDLA, we have a formal procedure as far as state government, but we also have several temporaries that work in our building. And that is something that's not posted through those resources. We use a temp agency, and a lot of times we'll have people come to us that way that may have a background in history but didn't know what an archives was, and they end up coming to library school. We actually have a temp right now who's in library school. So there may be some things through temp work as well, through actual temp agencies. Keep that in mind. And you won't see those on the SAA listserv or anywhere else. So.
Well, and nobody's saying this because I guess you all already know this. You got to have experience. You got to get it somehow. Nobody is just going to hire you with just a degree. not in this job market. And especially when you talk about libraries in general, but even archives specifically, it's even a lot tighter. Even if you get like a hybrid, you know, academic librarianship where you do the archives part-time, something like that, it's just, you gotta have some experience. And I will say, when I was in library school, I had one of the KDLA internships, which was a hefty internship. I think I worked like 2 days a week or something. It was pretty time consuming. But I also came to special collections here and did a volunteer job, processed a small photographic collection. And then one of the guys at KDLA was like the archivist for his church conference, the Methodist Conference of Kentucky. And he said, hey, you want to work for $5 an hour organizing this stuff in Midway? And it was just a bunch of church records in a room. And I said, well, okay, whatever. And, you know, I mean, it's like, I'm not a Methodist. I didn't understand the church history or anything, but I took it on. And so by the time I was on the job market, I had 3 institutions that I'd worked for already.
Right.
And you don't put on your resume that you worked, you know, 10 hours a month for $5 and that you did this one for free, you know, and you don't put that on there, you put your experience on there.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I'll also say too, when you're casting out for a job, do not use a generic cover letter.
Yes.
Always write, I mean, if you're interested in the job enough to apply for it, somehow in that cover letter articulate what you're going to bring to that. I mean, like why you're interested in it. Maybe not a personal cover letter, but you know, what that job will allow you to bring from your experience and how it might challenge you or what you can do for the institution. Sort of somehow articulate how you're interested in it, but how you can be a part of their solving their problem, how you can be part of their solution to it. And sometimes it's hard to muster that kind of confidence if you've only had little raggedy jobs here and there, and you're just like, it's a more of a dream, but you got to get that confidence up and say what you can bring to the job.
Yeah.
Specifically.
Speaking about cover letters, we all, I think, have said we have some kind of love of history and we want to work with old things. And your cover letter don't say, I want this job because I love history. That's like people saying, I want to be a librarian because I like to read. You know, you can bring that in, but you know, you've got to get back to, you know, their institution, how you're going to fit there, what the job is about, you know, stay on focus. And I read one recently by someone in the profession who did say, I love this job because I like history. That's not going to get it. It's not going to cut it, you know.
I'd like to just give a little shout out to the library school here too, in terms of transforming the field experience program, just tweaking it a little bit. The capstone projects have become a really, really nice feature for the students doing field experience. It's kind of like a little publication that they begin to cobble together. It becomes their own thing. I know that of the 4 or 5 field experience students I've had at Keeneland, one even has a position working in the thoroughbred industry, a thoroughbred industry library. And you know, that her experience focusing in on a very specific project parlayed directly into a job. And it's field experience in general is good, just getting that experience. But when you can have something that begins to even look like a, here's my video, or
here's my finding aid,
or here's my PowerPoint presentation, or something that demonstrates, and maybe in your voice, which you know, that's really powerful. It's very colorful, it's very powerful. And I think I think the students have really glommed onto that, and almost a little bit competitively, like, what are you going to do, fireworks? That's right. So, anyway.
And even if you don't have experience in an archive, take, you know, say you've been in an academic library working, take what you know from that and apply it. You know, I think even though we are this field and it is, you know, not librarianship, it's being an archivist, you can take some of those same sort of situations. I mean, we're still working in the same type of environment. We're still doing reference work.
We're cataloging.
We're still cataloging, yeah.
I want to speak to you, I don't remember your name. Pam. I was just thinking about, you know, how you're saying you work 40 hours a week and you know, it's hard to get experience, but, you know, as we've been talking, so many things are digital now that I wonder if there's a way that you could, you know, maybe you know, SAA or MAC, they're always looking for like newsletter editors or things like that, you know, and that's probably something you could do outside of your 40 hours. And, you know, I mean, it's work, you know, it'll take some of your time, but, you know, at least that's a way you can volunteer for something, they know your name, and then sometimes if another project comes up and you've done a good job, or they, you know, they get to know you, then it's in their mind and they're like, oh, well, Pam could probably do that. Pam could probably set up our Twitter feed or whatever, you know what I mean? So it just crossed my mind that in the digital world, you may have more opportunities. You're still gonna have to reach out and contact people and tell them what you can do, but I think that there may be more opportunities than you think out there.
I was just thinking too, that made me think of the Northeast Document Conservation Center has a couple of tutorials, and I'm wondering what other places do. There was a really good one that was just basically called Preservation 101, and Cornell for a long time maintained the digital preservation tutorial, which was really outstanding. At the time it was.
Yeah, they're still up.
Still up. But some of those things get you the experience with the language, you know, well, it's free, you know, it's free education, broadens your perspective, it gets you maybe to the point where you can have that conversation. So what is your outlook on digital preservation? And you can say, well, it's hopeless, you know. Well, we have these mechanisms for testing trusted digital repositories, and you know, there's some acronyms around. So anyway, but take advantage of those resources to build your confidence too. Jeff.
Well, very interesting discussion. I was just curious, you know, I know one panelist, I wasn't sure which, said don't even like computers very much, but it turns out we have to work with digital technologies quite a bit. And I just wondered if you could expand a little bit on what kinds of technology skill sets do you think are particularly important to students that are, you know, aiming for a career in this area, or what kinds of things would you like to see in that letter besides I love old things in history? Would there be some particular expertise in the area of IT that would catch your eye?
You cannot go into archives without some sort of technology base. Yeah, I was so small. We had one computer class when I was in library school here, and Richard Pollard was the teacher at that time, and he made me come in on a snow day and turn in a paper, and I got really sassy with him. And I handed it to him, and I go, well, here you go, Richard, but I'm going to work in special collections and archives, and I'm never going to need computers. Oh my gosh, within a year it was like, you know, eating my... And when I was at Duke, I did the first digital project there, and it's like, I hate computers. I really, you know, but it's like a sewing machine. It's a tool. It's a means to an end. So I wrap my head around it, but you need the technology that you need now, and you know, Brad can speak to like GIS. I don't know how to do GIS or anything like that. I'm working with CAD files, which are computer-assisted design and have all these layers in them, and I don't even get the layers in Photoshop. But yet, I'm supposed to manage these kind of files, so I have to learn as I'm going. My frontier now is, and I don't know how you would prepare for this, is something called BIM, Building Information Model. So the digital files that I'm getting from the architects, forget blueprints. I mean, they're 3D, and you click on a pipe, and you can go in, and you can learn the specifications for that pipe or that valve, or you get the manual for what kind of brick is used on the outside, and I'm like, how do I archive this? How do I make sure that this kind of information lasts forever? And there's nobody out there that I can talk to. I mean, the whole field of architects are like, well, we're trying to figure this out too. Yeah. So there's some things that you just can't be prepared for, but I would say, at the very least, know the entire Microsoft Office suite, from Link to Excel to Power to Access Database.
I'm teaching my intern SharePoint. I'm letting them use
I don't know SharePoint.
That is another dubious side of mine is I do the KDLA website 90% of the time, and started in Dreamweaver, and I already had to know HTML coding, so on and so forth, but we've transitioned to SharePoint, and that's one of the first things I started with my interns on this year was SharePoint. So,
I would say that also they should know like the digital metadata standards and things. I think that's really important to know XML, to understand that, to know Dublin Core, and then there are like sort of little branches of Dublin Core now that are specific to different areas. I know people are developing OH Core for oral history. There's PB Core. Also, content management systems. So particularly in archives, obviously we all know the Archivist Toolkit. I mean, it's archive space now, but there are other ones out there that are open source, probably DSpace, you know, learn about what open source is and the benefits and drawbacks of
at least
using
what's out there and what they do.
I think it's really good to know about those things and to have a really kind of mild understanding of the underlying concepts of these different software applications, databases, languages like XML or things like that. But I really think it's highly unrealistic that anybody would know all of that stuff or even one of those things in great depth. So my advice would just be to just kind of try to keep up with the ideas and knowing what these things are, familiar with what the acronyms stand for and whatnot, and maybe every once in a while getting to try to play around with something. But the key thing I think is to just always be flexible and willing to jump in and learn and be up against a steep learning curve, but to figure it out. I had an intern last year who was in her early 30s and was very, not that really necessarily has anything to do with it, but just wasn't very comfortable with using computers and technology. And she needed to use a computer for the project that she was working on, and she basically flat out refused to do it because she felt so uncomfortable with it. And I was encouraging her to experiment with it and try this and that, and she really didn't want to do it, so we kind of we developed a workaround for her. But she's right now on the job market and applying for jobs, and I kind of wonder how she's going to handle the situation in a professional environment, because everything is constantly changing. You can't know how to do everything, but you have to be willing to try.
Yeah, and it is a Microsoft world. Yeah, whether you want it to be or not.
I'd say, like Sarah Jane's saying, we're looking at the job field. Even if you're in your first semester, first year, start looking at the job ads. See what they want. See what they're listing on there that and often you'll see on there this long list. Like Sarah Jane says, you're not going to know it all. But be familiar at least with the terms, even if you don't have to go in depth. At least look it up. We love acronyms. What do these acronyms stand for? Sort through what do you want to learn? And, speaking and working in digital preservation, even those of us in the field, we don't have the answers. We're not sure long term. We're going on best practices. We're working it out. We think, we've got some answers, but, it is a wide open field. And I don't think you're going to see many job ads these days that don't say that you have to have some kind of technical proficiency. And there are so many organizations that don't have someone on staff that is ready to deal with electronic records. So that's what they're looking for. They want to supplement their current staff with someone who is familiar with that.
That's very true. What are your organizations doing to address the lack of permanence of any type of existing format that you have for digital at this point? CDs have a lifespan of 10 years. Tape is actually lasting longer than CD, but also goes out. And the servers that it takes to manage and to store these things, all the different challenges they have with viruses, electrical problems and things going down. What type of things do you have in place to try to constantly adapt to these challenges?
We still microfilm. We still film records at the state archives. I mean, we may be digitizing records, but with that comes a security copy of film. Because again, that is no machine necessary.
It's the most stable.
It's the most stable of any of the forms now. As far as anything else electronic, I'll defer to Beth. But yeah. I mean,
really, at this point, we're trying to find, like, we tell agencies, put in PDF for now. We're going to say that we think this is, it's not open, but the code is released. We're going to take this standard and say, look, we think we can migrate that later. And again, I do the more records management part where I'm dealing with agencies and saying, we got to think long term, not just 10 years, not just 50 years. We're working with government records that are all of your records, your mortgages, your deeds, your birth certificates. How, if they're born digital, as we call them, if they're created electronically, how do we keep them for 100 years? And, here's what we think, and it's not just keeping them, it's the authenticity of it. How do you prove over time it's the same record, that nothing's changed, because you have file corruption and, bit rot, where pieces are, of the file are being, something's happening to them. And so I don't want to go into too much detail, but it is a complicated process. It's not the same anymore as putting a piece of paper in a box and putting it on a shelf. There you're looking at temperature and humidity, and you hope that there's no water or flood or leaks or that kind of thing. It's very different in a digital world, and maybe if I want to talk after it. Again, I don't want to go through too much detail, but there are some standards. Again, they haven't been tested because we just haven't gotten that long term, that far ahead. It's a challenge, and it's one that everyone's facing. And even if you're not, a digital archive or someone that is dealing with that, all of our new records, we're still getting all the paper in, but we're all going to have to deal with electronic records. It's not, right now that it's a very specialized field for some folks, but in the future it's just going to be standard. That kind of got away from the question.
You got to get your geek on. You really do. And you have to be able to change and talk to other people about it. I mean, you gave an accurate description of just, I want to put my head in the sand and pretend those challenges don't exist, because there's no clear answer. You got to just be ready to change at any point, whatever the best practices turn out to be. But it's very challenging. And like you were saying, paper, I used to, for a while I had a job as a records manager for 34 counties in western North Carolina, and I worked for state government, and I went around. I was an advisor to like all the local government entities. So when I would give workshops on it, and we would talk about electronic records, and everybody thinks that digital records are so much easier. They're so much harder than paper. Paper takes up more space, and maybe you have to like plow through it instead of having searchable documents. But worrying about all these things, file corruption, longevity, everything, it's so much harder. Duplicate copies, who's got the archival master in an email thread. Just that's the kind of stuff that will just blow your head up if you think about it too much. But that is part of the challenge of working in archives now, is trying to keep your head above water in terms of digital preservation, electronic records.
Ruth, I believe you had a question?
I actually just wanted to say something more about workshops, online workshops, because nobody has yet mentioned the American Association for State and Local History, and they have at least one basic archives workshop, which is not, in my view, completely up to date with what's happening in the archives field, but it is basic, and it does use the language that I would expect somebody to have if I was, looking for an intern or an incoming professional into a job. So I just wanted to mention, also because they have a great magazine, and they're, especially if you're interested in historic sites or education outreach, reference access kinds of activities, that organization and also the National Council on Public History are other national organizations to keep
The
in mind.
SRAB, we actually have the entire Basics of Archives training series with all of the materials. If people are interested in it, let me know. That's actually on my items to do list sort of thing. So we have all the materials and everything. So.
And I would myself, being a student here that has benefited from SRAB and these workshops multiple times now, would highly encourage students who are interested in the field and who are interested in doing more work with classes and training, that maybe don't have the time to take a whole course or something like that, to definitely take advantage of those opportunities, because they are there and they're not very expensive or anything, and you meet all these wonderful people. Any other questions?
Well, have you all applied for any jobs yet? What kind of stuff are you looking at getting into? What would be like a dream job? That's a better question. Yeah.
I applied and was actually accepted as the director of the Historical Society. And had to turn it down because, for financial reasons, I couldn't leave the job that I have and my husband has now to pursue because the money just wasn't with it. But I would have loved it.
Was it in this area?
It was in Lewisburg, West Virginia.
Oh, God's country.
Yeah, well, that's where I'm from, but it was.
It's a beautiful
but
area.
It was, I mean, it was one of the original counties of Virginia that Washington surveyed. There's documents that the founding fathers have signed and stuff. It was the paper. Ooh.
Yeah.
Paper that.
And that's one of the
James
places where you can still, when you're, are small historical societies or small archives, where you do get that, you're working more close to the bone. I mean, and digital records are not that much of an issue. You're not managing electronic records, but you have paper stuff that you're trying to digitize, and it's kind of like they're behind the curve, and it's delicious, you know, in that sort of, you know, the fact that they haven't gotten so big and out of place. But I can sympathize with your conundrum. I recently, maybe about 3 years ago, started working on a second master's in historic preservation, which is old buildings. And it became clear, and I wanted to make a professional change and move into that career, because I was kind of bored with archives. But what became really clear to me is that I could not necessarily make that financial transition. It's even harder to get a job and lower paying than libraries and archives are. And you know, changing professions, you got to start at the bottom, and so I feel really lucky that I found an archive position that allows me to merge that interest. But sometimes you get the golden handcuffs. You're locked into the position that you have because of financial or location issues. So. Yeah. What are some of the other like dream jobs? Like if you could write your own job, what would it be?
What do you like? I know you're graduating, Ida.
Yeah, I'm interested in digital archiving, which was not what I was interested in at the beginning. And I'm actually slowly phasing out of school, so I haven't started. I look at job ads every day, but I do think I would like to work with mass digitization projects, because I really enjoy doing that. And I'm not a computer person. I'm terrified of computers, but for some reason when I figure out how to do something on a computer, my confidence is like way up here. And actually my classes at Liz have really helped with that. So I think that's the direction I'm looking at, and I'm now looking at volunteer opportunities because I'm moving back to St. Louis. So I'm hoping to work with either some historic homes or some local repositories there.
There are several, Missouri archival community is actually divided into regions, and the St. Louis region is very active, as well as the Kansas City region, but so I'd recommend getting in.
And one of our colleagues just moved to St. Louis.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
So
Emily.
we can connect you with her.
There you go. So she's just
that's really helpful, because I thought that I would just show up at their next, it's called AXLO, and I was thinking I'd just show up at their next meeting. But I don't know anybody there in the field.
We got you.
And also keep in mind with the job market, it generally takes 6 months to get a job. Actually, I don't even know if you can quantify something like that, but the job search process is very slow. So it's good to start in advance of when you're actually.
Which we all understand is hard to do. I think we all remember that last semester of grad school and trying to balance. I mean, for us it was comps and trying to apply for jobs, and life changes happening also in the meantime. So
I've seen a lot of jobs like the type that you were describing advertised through the NDIP. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Okay, National Digital Infrastructure Information, something like that program. Digital Preservation at LC. They've been, once a week I've seen them, and they are digital curators, digital archivists, not making things, but curating the content.
Yeah, every digital history paper I read is just I think that is kind of being able to get the narrative across to people, but then also having the whole archive and somehow working it all together. That's the dream for me.
Follow NDIP on Twitter.
Okay.
They're really active. Even
They
in
are
the
active.
evenings and weekends.
Yeah.
I think I've been there tweets from there, and I'm going to email them and say,
I know.
why are you tweeting it, Saturday at 10 p.m.
I don't know who that
Do
is,
something
but
else.
they are active.
They are active, and they reach me. Yeah, they reach me. Well, it's all in my feed, so it's like all of a sudden in dip, and then it's something interesting. Not that that's not interesting. Do the courses here get into digital preservation and curation?
No,
Not
No.
really.
not currently.
Maybe the information architecture class did, but I didn't take that.
I mean, I think that in order to be conversant in that arena, have to have familiarity with track and the OAIS model, and be very comfortable with, that whole architecture. Because that's the way they're building trusted digital repositories at the places where they're being built. Like at UK. I'm working on that.
Yeah, and Kentucky's actually very good in electronic records management and preservation. There's a lot of good people in the community here. I know you said you're moving, but that's something to think about. And maybe the professors here, invite some of those folks in to come and talk to the students. It doesn't necessarily have to be a course, but and just that familiarity, like you're saying. I know somebody just got a job as an electronic records archivist, and during his interview, he had to map out the OAIS model on a whiteboard. And so, that's the expectation there. I laughed at that one, but just to get the familiarity there among the students, there is an expectation, and I think that's going to be, like I had said before, it's just going to increase in job ads.
And MAC has been working on a regional list of archivists and librarians in the field that can teach on certain subjects. And Sarah Jane and I were in a meeting with this group, and Missouri was rather active and already had ideas about training courses and whatnot, and it would be very low cost to those attending in regional areas. So I would look into that as well when you get to St. Louis.
Yeah,
So.
it's sudden kind of that I'm moving back, so I'm just jumping in. So thank you.
And also, I don't know if it will fit in your time frame, but even if you've already gotten a job, there is a program at UNC Chapel Hill.
I was going to say that.
Helen Thibault, faculty member there. Is it called DigiCur?
DigSeeker.
DigSeeker, yes.
DigSeeker.
But it's a digital curation curriculum, and it's like 1 week every year, and it is pretty expensive. And then if you've got to pay for your housing, but it is it's the cutting edge, and people who are in dialogue with that, and it's in its 10th or 14th year or something like that. I don't know. It's been going on for a while, but it is where you will meet the people who are in that.
The brain trust.
Yes.
They are the brain trust.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's really neat to see the students that are coming out of that program, how comfortable they are with it. That whereas for us, it's kind of, some of us, it's more of a suspension of disbelief kind of thing that it will work. But they are completely comfortable, and they're going to make it happen.
Yeah.
It's just such a positive environment. It's really, really powerful.
Another one is the Archives Leadership Institute. Deirdre's gone, I've gone, Beth is gone. Jim Cundy is going, I think, this next year. That is held it was held in Madison, Wisconsin. It's moving to Folger?
Luther.
Decorah, Iowa. Decorah, Iowa. Rachel Botts. But that is another week-long kind of intense environment as well that can come in handy. So.
I have one comment from the online audience, echoing the importance of digitization skills. Edna adds that since she's at her university, she's the only employee in the Archives Special Collections Department, and so digitization is kind of the only way to get people aware that they even exist.
Yes, definitely. If it's not online, it doesn't exist.
That's right.
I'm just making a joke there. Of course it does, but in some people's frame of reference, it doesn't.
It just amazes me that people will call people in their 50s, 60s, 40s, whatever, and they just expect it to be online. It's just like, dude, really?
If I can't click it, I'll go somewhere else. Look at something else. Well, I'm curious to hear, several of you said that you wanted to be in academic libraries, and since I spent most of my career in academic libraries, I'm curious, what draws you to that, or, what you're hoping to get from it.
It's mostly just because it's what I've been doing, but also I find some of the aspects appealing about how the, I guess what motivates the patrons, where they're coming for information for research for their academic advancement. And in a branch this size, I've been able to build relationships with the subject faculty we serve and some of our neighbors around campus. And I've found that part of it pretty rewarding too. Just kind of getting to know folks and being able to get a better handle on their needs and serving them better.
I think it was always appealing to work in academic libraries because they're so big. You have big collections and they're so diverse. And something about that was always appealing.
He looks like me to reply. Okay.
I know. Staring at you, that's all right.
Well, I kind of am focusing on it because I don't know exactly what I want to do. I'm pretty open to whatever is out there. But actually, after I had my TA-ship with Sarah, I was really interested in digital preservation, and I had been contemplating, after taking a couple years off, getting another master's degree, specializing in that. But I think after I graduate here, I'd like to either get a job or volunteer somewhere and learn a bit more about the field. So academic libraries, in the sense that it would focus around that.
And Edna adds that she works in academic now because she worked in a public library before.
Right. What you didn't say. Yeah. Well, I would have to say that working in an academic library, you do have, it can be a very specialized user clientele. It's real stimulating to be around and to be engaged if you're on the public service end and reference end and doing that. I will also say, back to your initial question about what's a good resource, and I think your MLS, or your whatever they're calling it now, is one of your biggest assets if you do want to work in academic libraries and do something in terms of digital, electronic records, archives, special collections. As you know, or as you should know, or you'll become aware of, the profession is really stratified, and having a degree in library science is not the same as having a degree in public history. Now, if you're going to work for a historical society, they might not care, but if you're going to go in an academic library, you better have that MLS. And I know a lot of my colleagues have been, they've hit the ceiling because they have a degree in public history or a degree in history or even a PhD in history, and they don't have the library science degree. You can't get very far in academia without that. So it may be, if you're working on, if you're more in the IT end, that's not going to necessarily make a big difference wherever you work. And it's like, can you do it? Can you do the IT stuff? But it definitely, when I graduated, we referred to it as our union card, because it was a guaranteed job at that time. And I have noticed, working in the academic world, that it makes a big difference if you don't have the MLS. So.
And I'm obviously not coming from a university perspective, but in talking to people in the profession, one thing about the academic world, especially a university that's tenure track for librarians and archivists, is this push to publish and present that we don't necessarily have in a government archive. So now the salaries are usually a little bit higher in an academic institution than in government. So these are all things to look at when you're trying to decide, where do you want to work, what's going to fit best to you. Do you want to publish? Do you want to present? Do you want to be active? Are you seeking tenure? These are different environments, different expectations.
So we mentioned a little bit about government libraries and also academic libraries, but this is more of a question maybe for Becky, Heather, and Sarah Jane. Those of us who would be interested in working for a more specialized archive or library, maybe a private collection or institution or historical society, can you talk a little bit about kind of the differences there and what it's like?
Go ahead, Sarah Jane.
Well, I've only ever worked in a special archive, so I can't really speak a lot to the differences. But in terms of the approach, in terms of preparing yourself for a career or networking or trying to get a job, I really don't think it would be any different. I think you would still want to have a diverse skill set and some technical experience and be able to present yourself well in writing as well as verbally in person. Usually because the special archives are going to be smaller, and so you really need to be able to cultivate more of a relationship with the administration and your colleagues as well as your patrons.
And donors.
And donors, very
I was
much
say,
so.
donors
Very
is something
much
that
so.
comes to mind, especially for me, because in government, that is not something
Right. Whereas
we
in,
deal with it all.
in a government or an academic archive, you could potentially be behind the scenes all the time and not have to
Right.
interface with the public.
Right.
And that's donors for collections and donors for funds. This is huge. You know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think one of the things too that moving into a position like mine right now is, and actually even when I was head of preservation, is these are management jobs. These are really not you're doing the work jobs. What you're doing, you're being basically a good props manager. If you can bring the resources in so that the other people can fly with their activities.
Mhm.
So one of the things is to be able to think kind of in 360 degrees what needs to happen to make sure that everybody is productive and everybody is happy and that everybody's working towards the same goals. And, you know, I think I've set up 3 different book repair labs and conservation labs and haven't repaired a book in 20 years over my career. Or once I set them up, I taught other people how to do it and taught them how to organize supplies and how to triage and things like that. And so that would be one aspect to think about when you're, even if you are the archivist, you're going to be the director if you're the only person there. You're going to be the face, the public face, as well as the behind the scenes face. And so all of those skills that you built up from the days you were working a cash register to babysitting, you know, cajoling somebody to do something, you know, they're all going to come into play when you're the only one in charge, and you have to present that with confidence that I do know how to do the whole spectrum of events.
So marketing has become another really important thing. then?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
But I would say project management too. I mean, that's not a skill you learn. You can take a class and learn, or maybe you can, but you really learn by doing it, and either you're good at it or you're not. It's, you know, if you're not good at it, don't get into a
Right.
situation, you know, because it'll just stress you out. But it's one of those skills, just like a tech skill,
Yeah.
that if you've got it, put it in that cover letter, definitely.
So would that be a skill that would kind of be balance out as far as if you had the education and maybe you didn't have 3 years of doing archival on-hand stuff, but you have the marketing and special events planning?
Oh, that's
Yes.
definitely parlays.
Yes,
I
yes.
have that.
Yes, yeah, whatever you
I
can
think
use
it
from your
is-
former career, yeah.
And I think you very much will use those skills and that experience, but you would need to be able to demonstrate it in writing or verbally to your prospective employer about why you feel like those skills are relevant to the position.
It's
And
not
that-
expressed.
Right, and I'm sure they would be very relevant. But instead of just saying,
I have these
I have
skills.
this experience, you could say, I have this experience, which would inform my work with blah, 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 blah.
And if you can't get an internship, or you know you don't have time to, you volunteer, or it just doesn't work out, then I'd say at the very least, just start visiting archives, just doing maybe those are open on Saturday. Become very familiar with the environment. You know, it's different walking into a public library than it is to going into Young Library, as it is to going into the special collections here or the check-in procedure. You know, when I was starting a job, they want to know a lot about the user perspective. So, you know, look at least on that side. Or for those of you who don't have any idea, if you want to do archives, you don't want to commit to an internship because you don't know if this is for you, start hanging out, start going to see, you guys are open on Saturday, or I don't know what the hours are, you know, get comfortable, see if that's the kind of environment for you.
That's a really good advice. Really, definitely. You can make appointments. You can make appointments with any of us. We'd show you around.
Check out the finding aids, ask how they, you know, we give tours, especially if we host workshops in our buildings. We're almost always offer a tour.
But just call us. You don't have to be part of the group. We don't mind.
As someone who's taken the KDLA tour, I can vouch for it. It's interesting, and Valerie's a great host, and Beth, and they have a lot of good information.
We probably can't keep people from their work much longer.
What? It's Friday.
I like to stay all day. But.
Well, I actually, I brought some of my resumes, that's sort of like a CV, so not, I have a long career and I'm not trying to brag here, but so that you can kind of see what a career looks like, and then also if I did something that you're interested in, you want to talk about or something like that, I'm more than available to do that. Yes, and I would love to put somebody to work in the spring, and we can craft something to whatever you're interested in within my, small little library. But anyways, I'll leave these up here in my card if you all.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I know. MVP award.
Well, you all are probably on LinkedIn, and I'm still like paper. Any other questions? Anything else from you all?
I should also make a plug that the Filson offers a paid internship every summer, an awesome hands-on work experience, good internship, and but it's full-time. So, and that could be from a month to 2 months.
We try not to abuse, use and abuse the interns. We want you to get experience, and as an intern, ask if there are other things in the organization. Can I spend a day over here, even though that's not what my internship is? So you get an idea of what each part of the organization is working on.
Thank you.
Thank you all.